continue in the work Shmiras HaLashon. We are in Book 2, Chapter 12, and we are continuing to discuss Parshas Vayeshev and looking at the many issues that face the brothers as a result of the constant descent into using Lashon Hara. It's interesting in looking at Parshas Vayeshev, how it stands in contrast to other parshios, where, for example, like in this week's Parshas Vayera, the problem is there whether or not Sodom and Gomorrah are doing proper chesed. Here we're seeing how the issue is that the people are not, in this case the brothers, are not following the expectations of being upright by doing right by each other, in terms of not spreading nasty stories about themselves. So we saw in chapter 11 over the past couple of weeks the problems with the way that they were exchanging information and how they involved each other. The brothers involved each other against their father, against other people in the household, how they insulted each other. Now we're going to talk about the second half of the story now. So even though it's Parshas Vayeshev, it's really going into the second half of the story. We're going into into the parshios after that. So we're going all the way through Vayigash and so on. We're almost getting to Vayigash. So this will take us all the way through there. So we're going. This is more like in Miketz this week. All right. So it says that Yosef remembered the dreams. Okay. And he says to his brothers that they are spies. Okay. So at this point we're in chapter 42 now. Okay. So this is getting to the ends of the story. Okay. It's also, I don't know why it's continuation of Vayeshev. It says Hevshech Parshas Vayeshev. We're already in Miketz now, but that's the title here. So okay, so the intent was to help them to atone for their sin. And further it says, and Yosef commands to fill their bags with sustenance. The word is bar, and bar is an interesting word because it means the grain itself. It refers to the grain when it's been hulled and put into silos and so on. It's an interesting word in and of itself. Anyway, and they give their money back at the top of their sacks. Now, the truth is that giving them their money back caused them a lot of pain, because they go crazy when they see that. And the first person who opens their bag is Levi, and that's how Rashi explains it. And it says there, and their hearts left them, and they feared extensively, each one to his brother, exclaiming, "What has God done to us?" And also, when they come back to their father, and he says, and they opened up their sacks, and their bag of money was attached to the very top of it, and they became very afraid, and everyone was very concerned. And so too further on in chapter 43, Pasuk Yud Ches and 18, and they went back to the house of Joseph, and they said, "Listen, we got money back in our bags." We don't understand how this happened. They were worried about it. The anxiety for it was unending, and that was really part of it. Their suffering was because of money they themselves had taken, because of the money for selling Joseph. So therefore, what Hashem was planning for them is that the first thing they would experience was to open the bag while they were traveling and find the money. And that was going to start with Levi. And we just mentioned that Rashi puts that in his commentary. And how do we know? Because we said about Shimon that the first people who basically had the idea to go do that were Levi and Shimon, to get rid of Yosef. And then Reuven says, he himself is now. Oh, I'm sorry. He's moved on to the Chafetz Chaim. Now Reuven makes a statement. Reuven says, "You can kill my two sons if I don't bring Binyamin back." Okay, and still, Yaakov goes, "He's not going with you." So here's the midrash. It says, Yaakov responds to him, "You are the craziest firstborn. Your children are not my children." So let's try to understand the crazy statement that Reuven makes as the Chafetz Chaim. Here's the truth of the matter. Everyone that somebody's saying, except for things that he's saying that are made out of a true fear of heaven, because he's able to make choices about those things. These things have some type of influence that comes from heaven itself. Okay, and this is something the rabbis say in Chazal, that Hakol b'nei Yishmaim chutz mi'yirah Shamayim. It's Gemara in Brachos 33b. Everything is in the hands of heaven except whether or not you are in fear of heaven. And the Midrash goes further and says that Reuven's statement would come true with Dasan and Aviram, who are from Shevet Reuven. And this is his fault, because he says, throw them into the pit. So where does Dasan and Aviram go? Into the pit. And this is such a terrible thing, right? We see Dasan and Aviram with Adas Korach. And so do we see them collapsing completely into the depths, falling into the pit. And since their intents were not pure and good, so therefore, even though Reuven was trying to bring him back, he didn't do it. Okay? However, there was some reward in that, and that's to have his son, On ben Peles, saved. Why? Because he repented at the last minute. Okay? And so therefore, that's why his name was called On, because he was someone who grieved many, many years because of this. His name On is like Aninus. And the rabbis bring this up in the Midrash. Now, Yehuda, he makes a statement. This is at the end of the next parsha. If I don't bring him back and stand him before his father, I will have sinned to him every day of my life. Because he made himself personally, even in this world and in the next world, to be someone who was going to take responsibility for the pain that he caused to others. More so than how the other brothers had accepted it upon themselves. And this is something that is said in Parshas Vayigash. And the reason for this is because he wanted to sell him as a slave. And he was the most influential of the brothers. And he should have said to give him back to his father, like Reuven had said. And therefore was he punished. Okay, that heaven punishes him. Because he had to now put himself as a responsible party for his brother Binyamin in order to bring him back to his father Yaakov. And with this, he had to induce all of his strength and also be willing to spread himself on the ground before the king to have him take him in his stead as a servant in order that this brother, Binyamin, go back home to see his father. And all the other brothers who wanted to take part in the sale, they basically were trapped in this problem as well, because every one of them would have gone ahead and left themselves as servants, which we see later on in chapter 44, verse 9. Every one of us will follow in his model and become servants. And also in Parshas Vayechi, that when they think that they're going to be punished, they said, "Let us all be servants to you, that we should live." There's another important thing that we should understand, that that basically revolves around Yehuda, which is said in the Gemara in Bava Kama on 92a, that the bones of Yehuda, after he passed away, they circulated around the coffin. And so what was happening was, he didn't have any real calm until Moshe Rabbeinu comes and he makes a request on his behalf. Shema Hashem Kol Yehuda. Hashem, please listen to the voice of Yehuda and release him from this punishment. Okay, and so it didn't seem to work. They didn't seem to let him into the highest parts of heaven. And so therefore, Moshe continues to say, this is at the end of the Torah, says, El Mo Tivyehu, bring him close to amongst the rest of the people. And he didn't know how to do any learning. So the phrase rolling in their graves is a Jewish concept. Yeah, it is actually. Yeah, it refers to the bones rolling around. They don't have any, they're not really fully settled. But yeah, there's other concepts like that too. The Gemara talks about how when you quote somebody who's passed on, that their lips move in the grave. There's a lot of these ideas of people not being, somehow they have returned. But they've returned a little bit. They've left their legacy. So this, in a sense, this is like the legacy they have behind them. They're not really completely gone from our memory. And so he didn't know how to do that. And it says that his hands were very heavy. The Midrash goes on. Excuse me. And this is because of the fact that he says, if I don't bring the boy before his father, and he had already brought him, we see clearly that the punishment of a wise person was going to come true. And everything that a person says comes through Hashem's personal involvement in the world. And this is the reason why these things occur, because Hashem wanted it to happen this way. And it appears to me, Chafetz Chaim saying himself as the author here, and it's because we knew that all the days in which he did not reveal to his father Yaakov, that he would put them into a curse of some kind. And he basically had told the other brothers that they would be included in a removal of a connection to God's holy presence. It's an interesting way to state this in the Hebrew over here. So he basically included Hashem in their ban from revealing the secret. And so that's why Yaakov Avinu, as a result of being so sad about losing his son, was not revealed his whereabouts through his connection to God's Spirit. Okay? And so this is different, a little bit different than the way Rashi learns it, by the way. Rashi learns it that his sadness causes the Spirit to lift from upon him, and that's why he didn't know. But here we're saying now differently, which is that Yehuda put a ban even on God's presence from revealing it. But that's why it says at the end of the parsha, that the spirit of Yaakov was revived. The Targum there says that the holy presence of God returned to him. And so therefore, because Yehuda put on a ban, God put this ban on him from feeling like he belonged in the spiritual world with all his brothers. And so therefore, that's why he had himself to feel that there was an eternal problem, and that's why the problem also made sense when he said, I will have sinned to my father always, even in the afterlife. So we see how the implications of hiding this behavior had long-term implications on Yehuda's own afterlife. Another thing to see, the Chafetz Chaim points out, that a Holy One, blessed be He, did not hold back on the reward. Okay, how do we see that? So he's number one said that because since Yehuda was trying to protect Yosef, and it was a better idea than what Reuben had suggested, okay, and he kept him alive, and so therefore, Yehuda, your brothers will thank you and be praiseful of you, right? That's one of the blessings that Yaakov gives to Yehuda later on chapter 49, verse 8. Okay, and Rashi makes that point as well. And our rabbis of the Talmud further state that since he saved him, Hashem therefore allowed the kingship to rest in the house of Yehuda. And that kingship did not end until the destruction of the first temple, and not like the kingship of the house of Israel, that was temporary. Okay, and when that was done, they were all gone, and their entire households were all gone. And however, the household of David, which is from the house of Judah, it continues unto this day. We should also understand another important and amazing thing, that as a result of going on these many days, there was other forms of equivalent justice that went on, because Joseph himself had made a very important sin through his speech, which is what the Torah says, and his brothers did not wish to forgive him for this speech. And therefore they basically took him to the deepest depths of judgment, which was to say, let us go and kill him. And they said, let's throw him to the dogs, that they should bite him up. Okay? And so therefore that's why they were able to say, fine, then let us just go ahead and get rid of him as a slave. So even though Yehuda was able to protect him in this fashion, and Yehuda did that, and they allowed him to get killed, okay? Because he says, what's the value in that? This is back in chapter 37, verse 26. Nonetheless, they didn't want to forgive him for things he said about them. And so therefore he was sold. Okay? And so therefore in future generations, where one of the children of Yehuda who went ahead and received a Lashon Hara through a story, did not wish or did not want for any particular person from the children of Yosef to forgive him. And who was this? And that was King David. And what was the case? He believed Siva, okay, what he said when he said bad things about Mephibosheth. Because this is the story in the book of Shmuel. This is in Shmuel Beis. This is in chapter 19. So he believed that somehow that Mephibosheth and Siva had rights to the same field. And he went ahead and sided with Siva to allow him to take some value from it. So therefore, a voice came from before the Holy One and said, Rechavam and Yeravam, who are the children, and Yeravam is descendant of Yosef, will split the kingdom as well. So since he did an improper decision, he's punished with the splitting of the kingdom as well. And that's why it says in the verse that after the passing of King Solomon, Shlomo Melech, Yeravam comes, and they all rise up against Rechavam, who is the son of Shlomo, and they asked for him to lower the amount of taxes and the labor that he had put upon them. And he said hard things to them. He says, my father used to reprove you and beat you with little sticks. I will use stronger things, like scorpions. And so therefore, they all respond to him. This statement is recorded in Divrei Hayamim, not in Sefer Malachim. It's in chapter 10, verse 16. He says, every person go back to your tents. And they go back to their tents, and they make Yeravam the king. And why did this all happen? Because of the Lashon Hara of King David. And our rabbis say this themselves. So had he not received the Lashon Hara to believe about splitting the field, he would not have had his kingdom split. And then the children of Israel wouldn't have then gone ahead and served idols. And they wouldn't have been exiled from their land, And this is all something that was mida keneged mida, which was absolute justice. So let's look at another important thing that's very difficult over here, which is a punishment that was meted out to them as a result of the bread. Okay, so he says the bread. Okay, so they all sat down to eat a meal. What happened? So when they brought in Binyamin and he stood before Yosef, so they thought to themselves, all right, we did what he wanted, big deal. And so therefore they would leave. That's what they thought. That was not what happened, because then it says Yosef saw Binyamin, and he summons them to a meal, and they slaughter some animals and they prepare it, right? And they will eat with me in the afternoon, okay? And then after that, it says that they found out they were going to be eating the meal with them. Oh boy! And they became really agitated by it. And they were brought to the house of Joseph, and they wanted to talk to him about the money, and they said, please forgive us and spare us, take us for servants. And in the 31st verse, he says, no, we're eating. Then he says, he sat them according to their ages. And all the whole thing and the whole issue where he puts the chalice into Binyamin's bag, this was all meant to go and circulate around the meal, because they would have seen the cup at the meal. Because it says that he was a menachesh with it. He sorcerized through it. And therefore that's how he created the situation for them to be considered thieves for it. Because had they not had all this honor at the meal, they wouldn't have seen the chalice, and they wouldn't have wanted to steal it. And that was something that he made central, Yosef made central part of the meal. And they would not have been able to say they were the thieves for it had it not been for the fact that they were honored with the meal. So the cup and the meal were important parts of this. And the truth is that this was also considered a mida keneged mida. This was also considered an equivalent level of justice, because they sat down to eat after they threw Yosef in the hole, in the pit. And so therefore, something else was going to punish them through a meal. Okay? And it was going to cause them tremendous anxiety to have to experience the meal. And Yehuda especially, since he says, and this is later on in Parshas Vayigash, right? It says that he falls down and he goes, what can I say? How can I prove myself right? God has caused all of these things to happen to me. And he understands that this is a punishment that's been meted out to him by God. And so therefore we are going to be servants. And with this, the original sin of selling Yosef blows off of him. Okay, and Yosef himself does no longer want to be included in this issue. Okay, and he himself knew he would bring, he would go back to be peacefully with his father. Or the boys would go with the father. He would just keep the one who had the chalice with him. And Yehuda didn't want to do that, and that's why he went and did that approach. And so throughout this entire amazing chapter and this entire story, we can see how important it is that a person should be so careful with how he says things and how he acts. And so too from Yosef, one could go ahead and understand the way in which he conducts himself with holiness. Because it says in chapter 45 that be not mad at the fact that you have sold me. He's forgiven them, and until the very end of the parsha, and he calmed them down, and he had them, and he spoke to them so that way they understand that they could be safe with him. And that so too was also the greatness of Yosef, that he told his father why he went down to Egypt, and how incredible the whole story was, and how it was meant to be by how it was revealed through Ruach HaKodesh with the Kodesh Baruch Hu, right before he passes away. Okay, and that's the whole story. And so too the way that the rabbis themselves understand it in the Talmud and in the Midrash, that a person should be so careful to take care of his father's feelings, and so that amongst him and his brethren, that they didn't want him to be troubled by the entire passage of the events. Okay, And so therefore basically he says that his father never knew. He just helped to understand that this was meant to be, and didn't tell them how he actually got there. So with that, we draw to a close chapter 12, and we'll pick up with a new Sefer, where these issues show up and discuss them next week. So get ready for Parshas Shmos, so a new book to look at the issues of Shmiras HaLashon in those cases. Have a wonderful day.